on to our next presenter, who was a costume contest finalist at the 2004 New York City Big Lebowski Fest. Yes. I don't know what the Big Lebowski Fest is, but I'm sure it was impressive. And what sort of costume was it, Alex?
I'll tell you later.
She's going to tell me later. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Emily Axel!
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay, off we go.
Okay, so this is a true story of the worst present ever, or how the Da Vinci Code saved Christmas. And before I start, I'll give a trigger warning that this could offend your literary sensibilities. Everybody okay? Okay, good. Here we go. When I was 23, I was living in New York City and focusing on what everyone else seemed to be focusing on, finding a reasonable person to have a relationship with. After several months of being plagued with that angst, particular to people in their early 20s, the fear of never finding anyone and spending their life alone, and that these slides are not going to forward. It's been 15 seconds, hasn't it? Okay. Okay. So, when I was 23, I was living in New York City and focusing on what everyone else seemed to be focusing on, finding a reasonable person to have a relationship with. After several months of being plagued with that angst, particular to people in their early 20s, the fear of never finding anyone and spending your life alone, I'd been on 2 very promising dates with a guy I really liked. I was going to visit family in Indiana over Christmas, so we promised to stay in touch by email until I returned. Things were looking up. As soon as I got to my mother's house, the first thing I did was send off a quick message, expecting a quick response, so that our budding romance could get on with blossoming thanks to the magic of Hotmail. A couple hours later, I logged in and nothing. My mom still had dial-up back then and a clunky desktop computer, so it took about 5 minutes to check my email. Can you imagine repeatedly waiting a full 5 minutes just to be told I had no unread messages? Fine, maybe he was busy. I'm sure he would write soon. We'd been on 2 promising dates, after all. A couple days passed, still no email, but Christmas morning had arrived along with the ritual present opening. There was one gift that my brother, my sister, and I each had, and my mother suggested we open them together since they were obviously the same thing. Ripping off the paper, I see it's a handmade book called Grandpa Larry. It's one of these little books my mom had been making for her grandkids, my niece and nephew, since they were born. We all lived far away from each other, and she wanted them to learn about their relatives who lived far away. Full of pictures and cute little stories, they were a lovely idea. And after 6 or 7 about aunts, uncles, cousins, she'd come to the delicate one, Grandpa Larry. How was she going to play it? Grandpa Larry, my dad, had died years ago, back when I was a kid. He'd never know his grandchildren, and my mother wanted to tell them something about who he was. Fair enough, so she made one of these books for my 10-month-old niece, one for my 3-month-old nephew, and one, inexplicably, for me. As I stared at it, it took a moment to realize what was actually happening. I was sitting there along with my brother and his wife and their baby, and my sister and her husband and their baby, reading a book about my deceased father, intended as a gift for my future, but at present not conceived, child, and or children. It said things like, "This all happened a long time ago, before your mother and father got married." Okay, apparently I was going to get married someday to a man. That's good to know. And apparently we were going to love each other very much. Excellent. And apparently we were going to have at least 1 child. This was all very useful information, which should have put my mind right at ease. But I must have looked a bit confused, for my mother turned to me and said, "I just didn't want you to feel left out." Wow, she had nailed it. This was forward thinking. I mean, God knows you wouldn't want to be caught out with a new baby and no handmade picture book about your dead father on hand. Her production method for these books was to paste the photos on the pages and then laminate them with clear contact paper, binding them together using hole punch and yarn. It was all beautifully low-tech and DIY, and I really did admire the sentiment, usually. I flipped through to the last page of mine. It wasn't laminated yet because it was unfinished. A harsh, blank white space stared up at me, waiting impatiently for someone who didn't exist yet, my unborn child, my player to be named later. The only thing my angsty, longing, lonely 23-year-old self could do was cry. After checking my email another billion times, that's 5 billion minutes worth of checking email, I realized I needed something to distract me if I was going to make it through these quiet days in Indiana with nothing to do but check my email incessantly, refusing to accept that this guy I liked, of the 2 promising dates, of the agreeing to keep in touch over the holidays, of the having the potential to fall in love with, get married, and have a baby so that the Grandpa Larry book would not be in vain, had disappeared. So I went to the library and browsed through the recent rivals section. A book called The Da Vinci Code caught my eye. It was getting a little buzz at that time, but not the massive buzz it would one day get, and the only thing I knew about it was that a friend had read it and liked it. So I checked it out, and I started to read. I immersed myself into the fantastically gripping cliffhangers and the ridiculous plot twists and the dodgy historical facts, and managed to forget my troubles for a few days. And you know, it really did make me feel better. It really did save Christmas. Yes, it's true, Stephen King once described this piece of fiction as the intellectual equivalent of Kraft macaroni and cheese. But then, there, Christmas 2003 in Indiana, Kraft macaroni and cheese was exactly what angsty, lonely, 23-year-old Emily needed.